Before we start, take a second to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because stories like this don't come with easy answers, and you won't want to miss what comes next. Now, let me tell you about the night everything quietly shifted. That evening had been carefully planned, at least in my mind. No people, no obligations, no emotion en el labor. Just me, my couch, my softest pajamas, and a TV show I'd been postponing for months because I knew it would wreck me emotionally. The kind of show you don't watch casually. The kind you save for nights when the world feels heavy, and you want to disappear into someone else's story instead of dealing with your own. Outside, the city hummed faintly, but inside my apartment, everything felt muted. Safe. Predictable. I remember thinking about food, whether I should order something greasy and comforting or attempt to cook something halfway responsible. That was the biggest decision on my mind. And then, knock. Soft. Polite. Almost hesitant. At first, I ignored it. I wasn't expecting anyone. And honestly, I didn't want to be found. But then the knock came again, just as gentle, just as patient. Annoyed more than curious, I paused the episode and padded toward the door, already rehearsing an apology for whoever I was about to disappoint. When I opened it, my body reacted before my mind did. There he stood. Mark. My friend's son. For half a second, my brain refused to place him. I still saw the kid who used to trail behind his mother at gatherings, the teenager who avoided eye contact and muttered polite hellos. But the person standing in front of me now didn't fit those memories. He was taller, broader, his posture unsure but intentional, his face still familiar, but sharpened by adulthood, by confidence that hadn't existed before. And that smile, that awkward, almost apologetic smile that somehow managed to feel intentional. "Hey," he said. Can I come in for a minute?" The question shouldn't have felt heavy, but it did. Every instinct told me to pause, to set a boundary, to ask why. Because this wasn't normal. Not inappropriate, just unexpected in a way that made my chest tighten. I hesitated too long. And somehow, that hesitation already felt like a choice. "Sure," I said, stepping aside. The moment he crossed the threshold, the atmosphere shifted. Not dramatically. Not obviously. Just subtly. He didn't sit right away. Instead, he paced near the bookshelf, hands clasped behind his neck, like someone rehearsing lines he was afraid to say out loud. This wasn't about school. This wasn't about his mother. This wasn't small talk. You can feel when someone brings something heavy into a room. "I didn't know where else to go," he said finally, voice low. Careful. So I offered him tea. Because when you don't know what to do emotionally, you do something practical. We talked. At first, it was harmless. Safe. Shared memories. Stories about growing up. About how strange adulthood feels when no one gives you a manual. He laughed more than I remembered. And when he listened, he really listened. Not waiting for his turn to speak, not distracted. Just present. That was the first thing that unsettled me. The way he leaned in, not physically at first, but emotionally. Like my words mattered. Like I mattered. At some point he lowered his voice, as if we were sharing a secret. Even though we were alone. And without realizing it, I leaned closer too. That's when my heart started racing. Not because I wanted something physical, but because I felt seen. It had been so long since anyone looked at me that way. Like I wasn't just a role, or a responsibility, or someone's reliable support system. Just me. And that terrified me. I laughed too easily that night. I noticed it later. How my body language softened. How I stopped checking the time. How guilt whispered in the back of my mind while something warmer pushed forward. My friend trusted me. She relied on me. And here I was, sitting across from her adult son. Feeling something I hadn't given myself permission to feel in years. I told myself it was harmless. That it was emotional support. That he was confused and needed someone steady. But deep down I knew better. Because when he hugged me goodbye, just a second too long, I didn't pull away right away. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't innocent anymore. The weeks that followed felt like walking through a minefield blindfolded. Every interaction carried weight. Every message felt charged. Every excuse I made, to myself, to others, sounded thinner than the last. I lied about being busy, about where I was going, about why I seemed distracted. And all the while, I told myself I was doing the right thing, that I was helping, that nothing physical was happening, so how bad could it really be? But emotional closeness has consequences too. I started noticing changes in myself. The way my phone lit up and my pulse followed. The way I replayed conversations. The way guilt and comfort tangled so tightly I couldn't tell them apart anymore. This wasn't desire. It was intimacy. And that made it more dangerous. My friend noticed. Of course she did. She asked questions, small ones at first. Observations wrapped in concern. And every time, my stomach twisted tighter. The secrecy was eating at me, corroding something inside. One night, after a long conversation that ended in another lingering embrace, I sat alone and finally allowed the truth to surface. Even without crossing physical boundaries, this was already doing damage. Trust is fragile. And I was testing it without permission. Something had to change. That night, after the door closed behind Mark and the sound of his footsteps faded down the hallway, I stood there longer than I needed to. The apartment was quiet again. Too quiet. I went back to the couch and stared at the paused screen, but the story I had been watching earlier no longer mattered. Something inside me had shifted, and I couldn't pretend otherwise anymore. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because of excitement, but because of clarity. For the first time, I allowed myself to admit what I had been avoiding. Even without anything physical, real damage had already begun. Nothing wrong had technically happened. There were no lines crossed that could be easily pointed out. No moment dramatic enough to justify how heavy my chest felt. And yet I knew the truth. Emotional closeness can be just as powerful, and just as dangerous, as physical intimacy. Maybe even more so, because it sneaks in quietly. It convinces you that you're still being good, still being responsible, still being loyal. My friend trusted me. And trust doesn't break all at once. It cracks slowly. That realization hurt more than anything else. A few days later, I asked Mark to talk. Not casually. Not vaguely. I told him I needed honesty, and I needed it without comfort or softness. When he arrived, I didn't offer tea this time. I didn't fill the silence. I let the moment be what it was. I told him the truth. That what we had built emotionally wasn't healthy. That even though he hadn't done anything wrong, it was my responsibility to stop something that never should have grown this close. I admitted that I had enjoyed being understood, being noticed, being needed in a way I hadn't felt in years. And that was exactly why it had to end. He didn't interrupt me. When I finished, he nodded slowly and said something that stayed with me. I think part of me already knew this. I just didn't want to be the one to say it. There was no argument. No anger. Just acceptance. And disappointment. Sometimes that's harder to carry. After that, things changed. We didn't cut each other out dramatically. There were no harsh goodbyes, no accusations, no scenes. Just boundaries. I stepped back into the role I was meant to have. And out of the space I never should have occupied. With time, the emotional intensity faded. Not immediately, but gradually. Like something healing instead of breaking. I learned that not every connection that makes you feel alive is meant to be kept. And not every feeling needs to be explored just because it exists. My friend never asked me anything directly. Maybe she noticed something. Maybe she didn't. And maybe some things are meant to be resolved quietly, without ever being spoken aloud. But I changed. I became more aware of my loneliness, and more honest about how easily it could blur my judgment. I learned that vulnerability, when left unchecked, can pull you toward comfort instead of correctness. And that sometimes, the right decision doesn't feel like relief. It feels like loss. This wasn't a story about desire. And it wasn't about temptation. It was a story about boundaries. About responsibility. About choosing integrity over emotional escape. I lost something that made me feel seen. But I kept something far more important. My values, my loyalty, and my self-respect. And sometimes, that's the only kind of ending that truly matters. If you stayed until the end, thank you. Stories like this don't offer easy answers, but they ask important questions. If this made you think, like the video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think emotional boundaries are harder to maintain than physical ones? We'll meet again with another story